A rivalry that began with a simple offering spiraled into the first murder in human history, setting a precedent of violence and jealousy that would haunt humanity for generations. This is the tragic tale of Cain and Abel, a story of sibling rivalry, divine favor, and the darkness that lurks within the human heart. Set in the early biblical chapters, when humanity was still suffering from the consequences of its initial fall from grace, is where the story of Cain and Abel is set. After fleeing from Eden, Adam and Eve struggled to survive in a hostile region, their lives shaped by the ground they could not bring themselves to curse. They established their family in the middle of this harsh new world, giving birth to Cain and Abel in this fledgling human society. Their inheritance was a world shattered by sin and a persistent sensation of being cast out of paradise. They were more than just the offspring of Adam and Eve. Cain, the elder, worked the land as a farmer. He embodied the human endeavor to bring forth life from the stubborn soil, a task that was both a necessity and a symbol of the ongoing struggle against the cursed ground. His labor was arduous, a reminder of the heavy toll exacted by the original disobedience. Abel, the younger brother, chose a different path as a shepherd, tending to flocks and living in closer harmony with the creatures of the earth. In their vocations, Cain and Abel reflected the divergent paths of humanity, one tied to the earth, laboring and toiling, and the other closer to the pastoral and the divine. But in this devotional gesture, a striking difference was shown. God accepted Abel's offering favorably, but rejected Cain's because he sees past appearances to the true motives of people's hearts. The kindness shown to Abel had more to do with the true faith and commitment of the giver than it did with the type of offering. On the other hand, Cain's contribution was marred by a spirit of resentment and a lack of sincerity. The fact that Cain's contribution was rejected was not a random affront. Rather, it was a mirror of his own spiritual dissonance, or a heart that was not entirely given over to the divine. This divine favor towards Abel ignited a spark of envy within Cain, a spark that quickly grew into a consuming fire. The rejection of his offering was more than a personal disappointment. It was a blow to his identity and a challenge to his sense of worth. Cain's countenance fell, and with it, his spirit darkened. God, seeing the turmoil within Cain, offered a warning, an opportunity for redemption before the darkness could fully consume him. "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" God's words were not merely rhetorical. They were a lifeline, a call to introspection and repentance. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Cain came up with a scheme that would permanently change the path of human history because he was unable to reconcile his feelings. He advised Abel to follow him outside into the fields, which might be a place the brothers were acquainted with and had frequently collaborated in. But there would be no teamwork, no solidarity this time. On the contrary, the field served as a backdrop for treachery. The first murder was committed by Cain when he struck Abel down out of wrath. This was an intentional act of violence motivated by resentment and unbridled emotion, not a crime of survival or need. Abel's blood cried out from the ground, a silent yet potent testament to the atrocity that had been committed. This act was more than just fratricide. It was a fundamental rupture in the fabric of human relations, a defiance of the divine order and a violation of the sanctity of life. In that single violent moment, Cain shattered the trust and kinship that should have bound him to his brother, replacing it with the cold finality of death. Cain and Abel's rivalry was a symbol of a greater spiritual struggle rather than just a human quarrel. Envy, arrogance, and the need for approval are the darker sides of human nature that Cain's refusal to acknowledge Abel's favor with God revealed. In his youth, Abel turned into a live reminder of Cain's perceived shortcomings, acting as a mirror reflecting back his own anxieties. This competition was not stoked by outside factors, but rather by Cain's internal struggle, which, if unchecked, resulted in violence. When God confronted Cain after the murder, his questions were not for information, but for confrontation. "Where is your brother Abel?" God asked, knowing full well what had transpired. Cain's response was as evasive as it was defiant. "Am I my brother's keeper?" It was a question laced with irony and bitterness, an outright denial of the very essence of human solidarity. In those words, Cain rejected the intrinsic responsibility humans bear towards one another, a responsibility that had been fractured by his actions. Abel's murder was a sinister precursor of the violence that would afflict humanity, not just a singular tragedy. It was a premonition of the battles, massacres, and carnage that would characterize human history, all of which had their roots in that first jealous and angry act. Abel was the first victim in a world where brothers might turn against one another and pour blood in the name of pride and power. His death represented not only the loss of an individual, but also the loss of innocence. Upon meeting God later, Cain's deep-seated incapacity to comprehend the seriousness of his deeds was exposed, in addition to his guilt. God acknowledged that violence against one person reverberates across creation when he said that Abel's blood shouted out from the ground. This was not merely a poetic statement, but a profound truth. Cain demonstrated his detachment from the moral and spiritual obligations that come with being a human by refusing to accept responsibility and by asking a rebellious question about protecting his brother. God's judgment on Cain was as much a reflection of the gravity of his crime as it was an act of divine mercy. Though Cain deserved death for his actions, God spared him, marking him as a perpetual reminder of the consequences of sin. The mark placed upon Cain was both a protection and a punishment. It shielded him from retribution, but also set him apart as one cursed by God. It was a visible sign of Cain's transgression, a constant reminder of the murder he had committed and the life he had taken. Cain's descendants, too, bore the weight of his actions. His line became associated with rebellion and defiance, a lineage marked by further acts of violence and discord. Lamech, one of Cain's descendants, exemplified this legacy when he boasted of killing a man for wounding him, declaring that if Cain was avenged sevenfold, then Lamech would be avenged 77-fold. This escalation of violence and retribution highlighted the generational impact of Cain's sin, as the cycle of bloodshed continued through his progeny. The curse of Cain represented the ingrained defects that would afflict humanity forever, and it was more than simply a particular hardship. It was a wider critique of the state of humanity. It was a sobering reminder that sin has far-reaching effects that can ripple down through generations, influencing not just an individual's life, but also history and the lives of countless others.